So good afternoon. We can take the seats, please. So after a long day, we have the last session of the day, okay? And we have the round table. And as you will see in the program, one person, Johannes Vogel, couldn't make it. So we are going to be three presenters plus me, the moderator. And I have the pleasure to have here today, this Lisa Mansson from the Natural History Museum of Stockholm in Sweden. Peter Kjaergaard from Natural History Museum of Denmark. In Copenhagen, you have the museum. And then Gonzalo Giribet, the only name I probably pronounced properly, from the Museum of Comparative Zoology in Kjaergaard, the USA. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to the Museo Nacional de Ciencias Naturales for organizing the event, and the Fundación BBVA. So for this session, each speaker will introduce himself. So if you want to come up, you have the slides here, and they will tell us who they are and where they work. And yeah, you can come here if you want. You can just switch from here. Okay.
They see them here?
It's not showing here.
And there we go.
Now. Okay.
Go back.
Oops. Goes back now. Okay, they put it there.
You're doing everything.
Yeah. Is it going back or
You're going forward.
forward?
Yeah,
What
but
is this
that's the way we like
okay,
natural museums to go forward. So it's fine.
Okay, that's good. Okay,
That's pretty much it.
that.
Lisa, over to you.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks very much, and also thank you to our chair for mustering the courage to try to pronounce my last name. Well done. It's never been done so artistically, I would say. Many iterations. I'm Peter Kjaergaard, director of the Natural History Museum in Copenhagen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. It's been such an interesting day, very rich day, also a rather long day. So we'll try to keep you happy and amused for the next 45 minutes or so, I gather. It's also been a day where we've been speaking to ourselves. So we have been sort of living in an echo chamber. I'll continue that for a bit, but maybe we could try to break that up a bit. So we've heard people talking about the necessity of actually talking to other people, not ourselves. And I think this is a very important topic. Anyway, just to give you a very brief introduction of who we are in Denmark. You've seen a number of natural history museums already. We are a very old institution, founded first, we have botanical garden and a natural history museum. Our first garden was founded in 1600, first museum collections 1620. Raphael very kindly showed the Orleans collection. We still have many of the specimens in our collections. We are on a number of different sites. We have 2 museums and a botanical garden. Our collection size is about 14 million specimens. We have about 10,000 different specimens in our living collections in the botanic gardens. Now we have about 400,000 visitors to our museum sites, which amounts to about 8% of the population in Denmark. And then we are also a research institution. We're part of the University of Copenhagen, so we have this weird setup of being a national museum and a university museum at the same time. But that has the advantage of us having access to a very large research infrastructure, and all of our curators are also university employees, university professors, etc. So it has a number of advantages, also, of course, some challenges. For instance, during the pandemic, since we do not belong to the Ministry of Culture, we were not part of the museum task force. We were not given museum information. We were given university information. So there are lots of logistics. But I'll not say anything more about that. Yesterday, I arrived late because I was shutting down one of our museums, the Zoological Museum. We've had a Zoological Museum since 1870 in Copenhagen. This is the new Zoological Museum, opened in 1970. Lovely place, but we are building something great in Copenhagen, so we had the last day yesterday. What we're about is positive change for people and planet, very much aligned with what we've heard earlier today. This is something that we are promoting at all levels and all of our different activities. Obviously, we also have collections. They come from all over the world. I'm sure that we will also touch upon collections, where they come from, who they're for, what we should do with them, as we've already done. We do activities outside our museum. We have several public programs. We also run a field station in Tanzania, for instance, where we have built a visitor center and a local educational city. All of those people who live in the biodiversity hotspots around the world are also stewards of the biodiversity that we are all talking about. So we really need to think about how can we, also as Natural History Museum, give something back. How can we empower those people, enable them to be better stewards of our global biodiversity? We go out to supermarkets with travelling exhibits, as we've heard. Also, a number of other museums are doing, and we're building a new museum right smack in the centre of Copenhagen. Construction started 2019. I started as museum director in 2015, and I thought, this is a 5-year project. For me, it'll be a 10-year project. For the museum, it's a 25-year project, and that just gets us to the opening day. We'll open, fingers crossed, in 2025. We are reusing some old buildings, and we are also building. Half of it is in old buildings, and half of it will be in new buildings. Here's a map of the Botanic Garden. It's very central in Copenhagen. It's just next door to the busiest subway station in Denmark. So we've got the beautiful Botanic Garden and all the different sites, including the greenhouse, as you saw on the first slide. This is a cross section of our new exhibition area. We'll have 7,000 square meters of new exhibitions. We're building them underground to protect the garden. If I should ever build a museum, though, and another one, it'll not be underground. It's incredibly complicated and expensive to do that. Here you have a few pictures of the construction site. It's well underway. This is our ocean hall that eventually will be a tribute to oceans, and it's in all of the exhibits that we're building. It's about putting a ground perspective on our planet in the making. It's been going on for about more than 4 billion years. It'll continue for another 4 billion years, perhaps a bit longer. It depends on how things are going. It's a dynamic planet. It's still in the making, so it's not a fixed thing. Also, as we've heard about, we saw the climate curve of going over 5 million years. This will continue. It's still in the making. And this is really a message that we are trying to push through. We have 8 different themes. They're all thematic in the sense that they are integrating geology, biology, climate. So we are not separating our exhibits into disciplinary stories, but really trying to get that holistic, integrated view where humans are everywhere in that story. We are part of the story. We're not, as the traditional view would be, the pinnacle of everything, the lens that we need to understand the rest of the world through, but being part of the story, being integrated in that story. So that's us, and that's me. I have the privilege of running the place. Lisa.
All right.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege to visit Peter the other week in Copenhagen, and I can say that it's even more exciting to be there on site. It's an absolute beautiful natural science museum. So let's see. And here I recognize myself. So my name is Lisa Mansson, and I'm from the Swedish Museum of Natural History. And to say a couple of words about myself, I'm not trained in the paleontology and the fields that we have been represented by earlier here today. I'm actually from the Karolinska Institute, having a PhD in infection biology. So in terms you want to discuss bacteria or viruses, or preferably the inflammatory response to that, I'm all in. But I've been spending most of my days managing museums. So before I came to the Natural History Museum, I was the director of the Vasa Museum, that is actually the most visited museum in the Nordic countries. And that's even further from my original field, of course. But now to the museum where I'm at now. And it's one of the biggest museums in Sweden. It has a collection that dates from 1739 and was established as a museum in 1819. And we've been a government agency since 1965, and I think that is quite important because it really affects how you are being managed and what choices you have, the freedom that you have, and where your money comes from. And the collection that we are responsible for carries about 11 million specimens and including about 400,000 types. And we might be adding about 180 each year through our research that we're doing. But of course, a lot of our focus is on our visitors, and we have about 700,000 coming through our doors each year, and even more visiting us digitally. So we've been the digitally most visited museum for the last 2 years. And I think that's interesting if we go back to where this slide started about how old we are. So we were able during the pandemic to really refocus and use the same personnel doing other things. And then really being able to keep in contact with our audiences, but then doing it digitally instead. So these are the fields that we're doing research. It's botany, geosciences, paleobotany, zoology, bioinformatics and genetics, and environmental research and monitoring. And I think that's an extremely important field for us, and we get a lot of attention that way. So it's not maybe the traditional natural science field, but as a government agency, we're, for example, giving out the daily pollen prognosis. So we have daily visits doing that, and that really helps people through their day. And as we're having their ear concerning their own health, we can also talk about all the other important subjects that we, as a global world, are facing. And we are, of course, proud of our science infrastructure. We are 250 people working at the museum. 60 of us are full-time scientists, and they publish pretty well in high-impact journals. And often we have visitors and researchers coming from other countries, about 300 a year. And they're often coming for our international and national facilities. And It's of Nordsim Vega Center. It's in geology, but maybe even more for the DNA. And what's most, I guess, popular over the last couple of years are the ancient DNA lab. So we got the world record in ancient DNA from a mammoth, 1.65 million year old DNA that we were able to sequence just earlier this year. So that was worldwide news. But the 300 guest scientists, so this is a normal year, and if we count it by day, we have about 1,500 guest days, while during the pandemic that went down to 500. So I think talking about pandemics, it really has an influence on how we can be working together. It was quite limited during those years. And of course our collections are loaned to other parts of the world. But being a government agency is not only about our collections and our research. We do a lot of bird ringing DNA identification. We have a biologist on call. That's all year round. And in a pandemic, we needed to double that service because everybody was out in the forests. They wanted to spread out. And I think we had a great opportunity there to really talk about biology. And I already mentioned the pollen forecast. But I think to point out something quite important, it's the National Wildlife Program. I think we already today had heard Living Planet, the WWF report mentioned. And I think we can see the decrease quite drastically. It's been down by 69% since the 1970s, and we definitely see that in Sweden too. So our vision as a museum is a thriving planet, and to reach there we are doing a number of things that I know that you recognize yourself doing as well, to really make sure that those collections are well preserved and available, to do the research on Earth and really focus on the biodiversity. And we're also doing all this nature monitoring. And really take an opportunity with all the visitors coming through the doors or being there in our digital space. And in this sense, all working together. So I think with this, I give the control further.
All right. My name is Gonzalo Giribet, and I'm the director of the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard University. And after listening to all the talks and all the presentations, I realized I'm the director of a very small museum, so a very small operation. We're just part of one academic department at Harvard University that has botanical museums, has an arboretum, has a forest. And I'm just the director of the Zoology Museum, only the research component. Then we have exhibits, but they're all different units. However, we are an important institution in the development of zoology in the United States and in other places. As Kjaergaard showed earlier, our museum is one of the earliest museums, the third one in the US, one of the earliest museums founded in the world. And we have a collection that is small compared to the numbers that we have seen, but that is very important because we hold a lot of the types of many early species. So I'm just going to be very brief here. The museum was funded in 1859 by famous Swiss-born biologist Louis Agassiz, or geologist, biologist, everything you want to name. And he went to Boston to give a couple of lectures at the Boston Society of Natural History. And they asked him to stay in Boston and to, start a professorship at Harvard University, and he decided to fund one of the earliest museums in the US. But it's exclusively a research and teaching institution. So it's very different. Our mission is to preserve the natural history collections and to do research, and then use that research for many of the goals that we have seen. And of course, some of our specimens are on display, like I was showing in the earlier picture, in the public galleries. But I have nothing to do with the public galleries. I just contribute my own exhibits for those public galleries. I'm not in charge of the budget, with just the MCC, because it has a large endowment, subvention some of those exhibits, but my goal is exclusively all the research and teaching that goes on in our museum. We have 9 collections, vertebrate paleontology, invertebrate paleontology, the different zoology groups, entomology, invertebrate zoology, and the vertebrate classes. And we hold about 21 million lots of specimens, only counting specimens. I'm not counting the libraries, I'm not counting any other objects that we have, very large collections of historical objects related to zoology. That includes 68,000 types and about 29,000 primary types. I know those numbers sometimes are hard to relate, but we have about a quarter of the herb types in the world, and about a quarter of the mammal types in the world are in the MCC. So those are some collections to give examples of some very important collections in that sense. We are small staff. There's about 100 people working in the MCC. From those people, we have 11 curators who are professors at the university. Then there is the research staff that works in the collections, and all the postdocs and graduate students that work in the MCC are part of our budget. So in total, we produce about 120 research publications per year, which is the output, because again, the main goal for us is to do the research and to make sure that our students get the proper training and they use the specimens for their research. This is something that in many universities has been forgotten. Many university students never get to see specimens. We are lucky that we spend a lot of time in the field with our students. Most of our zoology classes make use of museum resources to take the students out in the field. I've been teaching at the Tropical Research Institution from the Smithsonian in Panama for about 20 years. I take my zoology class there to do some of the field work. We've been going to Australia to dive in the Great Barrier Reef. Other students are going to Costa Rica to see the birds or the herbs. So one of the missions is to work with the specimens and then to observe nature in place. So we're trying to train a generation of relatively privileged students, the ones who go to Harvard, to build an interest in natural sciences. And I know that talking about Harvard sometimes is difficult because we have the stigma of being this very elitist institution. And, I wouldn't say that some departments are not, but I just, there's, as you know, studying in the US is expensive. I think the tuition at Harvard is in the order of $45,000 a year. I know for Europeans that's crazy. But the average undergrad student pays at Harvard is $16,000. So tuition is $45,000, the average is $16,000, meaning that 75% of the undergraduate students at Harvard get full stipend or part of stipend paid by the university. Admissions are not based on economics. Students get admitted, and later on, they're asked to send their taxes from their parents, and then decide how much they pay for their education at Harvard. And that's a very important thing, because that helps, as we've been talking about donors and all things. The best strategy we can do is train people who would not have those opportunities by giving them free education. And when they become very successful and they really like things like natural history collections or things like that, because they were able to be very successful by studying, at a great institution, maybe paying nothing, then they come back and they give money to those institutions, right? So I think it's not a bad strategy for us. Anyway, this is the budget of the MCC. We're very fortunate. We're not as fortunate as Kjaergaard with the federal government providing the budget, but the blue is our income for the MCC, and most of the income, about 90% of the income for our thing is our endowment, which is the second. So I'm the 10th director of the MCC. The MCC has been around for 163 years. The second director, the son of Louis Agassiz, decided that in order to be a biologist, you needed to be a millionaire first. So he went into mining, copper mining, and then set up the funds that endowed the MCC. Most of that endowment still comes from the copper mines in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, from Alexander Agassiz. He really wanted to have a museum funded for life and provided those funds that still are driving a lot of the research that we can do there. Obviously, we have income from federal funding, also from grants, and that's basically our most of our money where it comes from, right? A lot of it from endowment, private endowment, which is that thing that we need to work in Europe to get people to donate to institutions that are really meaningful to them. Anyway, that's the way we spend things. That's the other difference with European museums. As I was talking to Rafa, he's giving us his budget, but he's not counting the salaries. The US institutions, most of the money or a large chunk of the money goes on operating expenses for buildings and budget for salaries for people, right? So you can see there in the two blues, I think, is operating expenses and salaries. Most of the money that we spend in the MCC is for that, but also a lot of it for expeditions and funding. And we will talk more about some of these things, but I think we're trying to use some funding also to be responsible, to bring researchers from countries where we're holding their biodiversity resources. So we can pay for them to come to study the specimens from the countries of origin. And I think that one of the things that I want to build as director is a stronger program to be able to at least facilitate that research for people in other institutions. So, and with that, I'm done, and we can start the questions from.
Okay, so if we move on, I think we've been talking about that the whole day, like this, we are entering the sixth mass extinction, as you can see in this graph, about the industrial revolution onwards, we went above, we rocket, the extinction rate well above the background, what was expected, going up to 100, 1,000 times faster than it should be. And it's been said today that that's a real problem, and it's caused by pollution, habitat degradation and fragmentation, climate change, evolution of pandemics. We've talked today about that, emerging infection diseases that, I work with reptiles and amphibians, and for instance, it's been devastating for amphibians. More than 200 species of amphibians worldwide have disappeared. And then invasive species that bring these diseases, so with them, so it's terrible, and then hunting, overhunting, and species trafficking. So the idea would be to start, the conversation about what museums can do, to tackle these questions, or how do you think museums can contribute to reduce the sixth mass extinction if you believe on that it's going on the loss of biodiversity? What should we do? I mean, what's your opinion about all this challenge that we have, that is the theme, of this round table? Yeah, thank you. Whoever wants to start, it doesn't matter.
I mean, I can start just by saying that obviously, because museums are the repository of a lot of this biodiversity, is provided a lot of information that will help us understand what's going on here. And I think that the most paradigmatic example might be the Grinnell transect that he did over Yosemite more than 100 years ago, and he did it with the specific intention of looking back at that transect 100 years later. He already foresaw that things were going to change in a great way for over 100 years. At the time, he didn't imagine that we could even do DNA studies to see not only how the distributions of those organisms have shifted, how the animals that were in the higher parts of the mountain were pushing even higher up, how some of the lowland species were expanding their ranks, but also now we can look at some of the genes that have changed in those populations that they need to adapt to different climates, right? So I think that was a very important visionary aspect of the research at the time, thinking about museums. And I think that teaches us that a lot of the things that we're doing today, like preserving, genome, or at least, preserving tissues for future genome work when it becomes easier, those things are very important, right? Thinking forward, thinking what can museums do today to contribute to better understanding a lot of these aspects in the future.
Yeah. I could build on that. I think we had Kirk saying earlier today that we could look in our collections to see the future, and maybe in different words, but that's definitely true. So I have a professor among my colleagues, Professor Vivi Vaida, and she's going back to earlier mass extinctions, I think 66 million years ago, and she can then follow the fossils and on a cellular level actually to see which ones have actually survived, and we can see them still today. So she's working together with the researchers outside of the museum, and then they together in a collaborative sort of over the boundaries effort. They've been able to do really interesting studies now, and that's actually we as a museum we get quite well funded to do that. We get money from funds that we normally aren't being able to get funds from, and so it's both something that is adding to understand how to tackle the max extinction situation that we more or less are in already now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, to me, I think we should really look at our core strengths. What are we good at Natural History Museums? And I think, for me, 3 things stands out. It's data, it's storytelling, and it's collaboration. I think we've touched upon all of these issues in various ways today. We need that data. We can provide that. We have the public's trust. We got everybody's trust, and we need to use that data. We're all familiar with hockey stick graphs, but hockey stick graphs, they're nothing without a powerful story. Mm-hmm. We can make. You got your amphibians, we have so many other examples. We have, for instance, polar bear skulls in our collections. We have time series of 200 years of polar bear skulls. When we look at the heavy metals in those polar bear skulls, we can produce exactly the same hockey stick graph. But that's a very powerful story that we can tell. So we can detect everything that we're doing to the planet, to life on Earth. We can detect that in one of the most iconic species of climate change currently, and we can tell that story. But it's worth absolutely nothing if we just tell that story in Copenhagen. Mm-hmm. We need to share that story. We need to collaborate. We need to collaborate, as was suggested earlier by several of the speakers today, and by creating networks of natural history museums. But we also need to expand that collaboration. And to me, when we look at the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, it's the last one, the one about partnerships, building new partnerships, building powerful partnerships. That holds the key. And we are very attractive partners. So we should also take advantage of that and build our network, not just among natural history museums, but increase that to partnerships that invites and involves all the other stakeholders. And if we do that, maybe we have a chance of not, I think, changing the 6th mass extinction, but finding a more sustainable way of dealing with it and living with it.
But do you think that, at least in Spain, society recognized the work of the medical doctors when they saved us from COVID, and we even applaud them every night and blame it. So do you think that we are recognized, like museum specialists, are we recognized by society like we are going to save them from this or not? Or should we,
Let me answer that actually with a study that was just done in Sweden.
Okay.
And because the trust, and I think that was discussed earlier as well. So the public was interviewed and to say who they trust the most. And it was the healthcare system post-pandemic. And it was, of course, the journalists and the politicians and government agencies. So it was a huge study, really interesting. And museums was also on this list.
Was? No?
Yeah.
Was
yeah,
also.
we were on
Okay,
this
you made
list.
it. But before, above or below
Do you wanna guess?
politicians?
Oh yeah, well that one is easy. So if this is the baseline. Politicians was under.
Okay.
Minus
Okay.
22 if I recall. Okay, so where would you keep the, and I would say the healthcare was on top, I think.
Okay.
Plus 64, I'm saying now, roughly. So where do we have the museums, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, exactly. They're pointing up here in the audience, and that's right. Exactly. So the healthcare system was on the top, but then museums, and then we had politicians, I said like this. But then Counselor of Justice was on this list, and I think that was 22
Okay.
on the plus side, but still, or 29 maybe on the plus side.
I think-
And we were 58, I think. Yeah.
I think that's an
Please.
incredibly important point, Lisa, and it's an exceptionally valuable currency.
It is.
It's also a great responsibility.
Yeah.
We share that responsibility. A lot of us in this room, we really need to use that public trust. We need to take that stage, to seize that moment, and make natural history museums play an important role in our course to perhaps not save the planet, but make it as livable as possible for as many species as possible.
Yeah, and coming from Greta Thunberg country, it's
Yeah.
like we could just as well be viewed as totally missing the point and failure. So it's we need to really take care of that.
But I think you're talking from the perspective of two Scandinavian countries, right? Where trust for science and medicine might be very different than in other countries, right? And I just want to bring this to the point of the international collaboration, Peter, that you keep bringing to the discussion. And I think it is very important, but there are different values in different countries and different levels of trust and different funding systems, right? I mean, Europe has a lot of things connecting the European museums, but not because it's funded from the individual countries, but because it's funded from the European Commission, right? Synthesis and things like that. So you can only apply to these systems if you are one of the EU members who is contributing to them. So in the end, I think that what we need to break is the barriers of trust to science in different countries and the barriers of funding, so we can do much more exchange of research. And even in the US, it's very different if you're funded by the federal government or if you're a private institution, or you have the museum in New York, that it's a very different level of funding, right? It's not a federal museum, it's a private institution, but it's not linked to a university. I think Lisa might correct me if I'm wrong, but gets a lot of funding from this, from the city of New York, right? So it's just very different who you can pay for depending where your money comes from, right? And I think that model of funding across borders, across continents will be a very important one to create this global museum with a global trust also.
So for this initiative of the global genomes and also all the talks that we have seen today, it means that we will need to do a great effort on genomic work and a great effort also on taxonomic work and classifying, because we need to work in parallel. Somebody will have to classify all these specimens and to find all these new species that have not been described and describe them. And guess what? I did a poll in my institute as well. I said, who wants to be a taxonomist and who wants to be a bioinformatician, a genomic guy, or girl, and yeah, taxonomy. We are losing taxonomic expertise, at least. I wanted to tell you something maybe is particular for Spain, but it's here. Funding for taxonomy is not great. And if you do the PhD in taxonomy and you get a few papers in Zootaxa or in some journals that are not well regarded, when you want to get a position back in your country after you go out for postdoc, you have lots of problems. How are we going to deal with that? If the PhD students cannot do, the research that they do in taxonomy is not recognized, it's going to be complicated to tackle all this because we are going to be losing expertise. Are your museums hiring lots of expertise in taxonomy, and how are you dealing with that? PhD students are valued in the US, or they don't have any problem even if they do papers?
No, I mean, I think
that might be a particular problem from Spain, but I think...
No, but I just think that you kind of oversimplify. Do you want to do taxonomy or do you want to do genomics?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and I think Kirk referred, he said, in my museum I have scientists from the 19th century, from the 20th century, and from the 21st century.
Yeah.
What I think is that, a taxonomist today cannot be a taxonomist from the 19th century, right? You have to do genomics, and
but
you can describe
time is limited.
species.
Your time is limited.
You cannot be just someone describing species. And we do have funding for some of that work, for field work. We have the biodiversity postdoc to enhance, to hire people who are, this is something that was set up by Ed Wilson. The purpose of those postdocs are people who are doing taxonomy, but they have to do more. They have to be 21st century scientists who are contributing to science. And this thing that we're losing taxonomic expertise and all that, I mean, I disagree. I think we have more species described per year today than in past years.
Yeah, that's for
and they're better quality species descriptions than they were 100 years ago. You cannot just do that. And, I describe species every year, and I do genomes, right? And you cannot just do one or the other. I mean, you can do one or the other, but as you say, if you want a job, you need to have today a broad portfolio of expertise, right?
Yeah, but I think it's a very important point, the one you're making, Gonzalo. It's about changing that conversation about what is it that we do at natural history museums today? What is it when we are describing taxonomy, when we're describing life on this planet? And I think we need to get away from that, which is basically a 19th century language and a basic 19th century understanding of how do we work scientifically. We work differently today. We need to embrace that, and that again comes back to my point about storytelling. We also need to listen to our own stories and take them in when we are telling ourselves and the world what we do at natural history museums. I'll give you one recent example that gives me hope. At least we've been hiring 3 new curators over the past year, and we got some exceptional talent among the applicants, and many of them would be able to do the job, and exactly the way that you're describing. I mean, they had all different kinds of takes and new interesting ideas, things that we had never thought of at the museum, which was such an inspiration to see all of that talent, bubbling new ideas of how we're going to take what we do at natural history museums forward in a way that will, again, we're limited by our traditions, we're limited by the way we've always done things and the way that we think things should be done. But if we really pay attention to all of that talent, all of those new ideas, we've been talking about this a number of times during the day, that the people who started our collections, none of these people could have predicted the way that we would be working on our collections. And I think we're limiting the next generation of scientists coming in if we are trying to predict the way that they would be working. So I think this is something we should really let that young scientific talent free to do all the things that we would never think about, and I'm not too worried about it. I see so much talent, and I also look at the numbers. How many species are we actually describing? Yep. We're pretty good at it. Yep. We would like to accelerate it, but that's because we are
also the
impatient.
easiest that we can publish today, with the word processors and everything. There are many journals that are very quick.
I like how a problem and a challenge has now been repackaged to possibility.
Exactly.
So this a great
it was a
last
real
session
challenge.
for the day.
I was talking about, even personal experience. I'm stubborn, so I keep on for my promotions put in my 90-page taxa with 12 species description, and they said, don't put it there, I'm not going to promote you, you know. So but I got promoted. So but it's just like my point, you know. But I mean, I do know that young people cannot do that.
Because if you only had 5 papers which were, you know, those monographs, maybe you wouldn't be promoted. But if you combine, I think that it's very important that you show all, you know, the scope of the things that you can do. And I really, again, strongly, I don't feel, because I kept asked that thing all the time, and the numbers are there. Of course, we need to accelerate biodiversity description, not because we're losing so much taxonomic expertise, but because we have that, you know, 80% of biodiversity to describe. And at the rate we've been doing it, we're not going to get there, right? So there are other reasons to accelerate the rate of description. And we need to maybe relax some of the rules of how species are described.
Yeah.
And we are making changes.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think we should have people today just doing taxonomic descriptions. I think that biology today is much broader than that. And with that, I'm not criticizing any taxonomies, but I think that the new hires should know to do more than just taxonomic descriptions.
Good. Lisa?
Yeah, I agree. I just feel inspired right now. We don't have that problem as of now at the museum in Stockholm, but I have been presented to the problem that this should be a problem in the future, and now I know how to answer that. So it's very good.
No, maybe, you know, we have talked also about these millions of species that are not described yet. Let me show you something. I have a slide, the next one. I mean, oops. So, I mean, it's not that it's just, you know, one of these trees of we have been talking about what we are missing and the diversity, but if you check on the top, you know, the Eukarya, we basically, from the 2 million species that we have been telling today, all of them fall within metazoa, plants or fungi. I mean, if we really want to tackle what we were talking about, the biodiversity crisis, and we are, you know, losing lots of species, but that graph was done with mammals. I mean, it's based the background rate on mammals, and the animals were all vertebrates. What are we missing? Well, we are missing a lot, because, I mean, metagenomic studies, they show that from Eukarya, metazoan, plants, and fungi together are just less than 30% of all the taxa. So what's your opinion about that? The museums don't really, I have not seen, they don't tackle unicellular eukaryotes, and is it important, is not important? What is your opinion about that? Yeah.
I could start on that one. I already told you I'm from infection biology by training, so of course we're missing out on a lot here. Yeah. And I think not only because if one would say that the bacteria here would have you know,
you are expert on bacteria.
You know, for the sake of bacteria, I think we're missing out on the sake of ourselves, since we are already sitting here outnumbered by all the bacteria in our bodies. And we wouldn't be functioning without the bacteria. So if we won't keep track on them and notice when they are disappearing, and I think we all know how badly we feel when we are having antibiotics, like we're killing the bad ones, but also the good ones, and we are not a functioning human body during those coming week, maybe. So I think we should definitely focus more on the diversity within bacteria and monitor that. But I think we need then to develop new methods to do that efficiently, because there are quite a few and they're very diverse.
And I think it also comes down to our understanding today of species interaction. And it's not just about a plant and a pollinator, it's far more complex. We got viruses, bacteria, and we know that there's a lot of research now being done on microbiomes that's changing our perception of our own bodies. And it's also a lesson to us, we don't need to do everything at natural history museums, and that's where the point about partnerships really comes in. So who are our partners in order to deal with these issues. Are we, at Natural History Museums, are we the ones who should keep all of this in our collections? Maybe we are, maybe we aren't. Maybe there'll be others who are more suited to that. Maybe it's in the health faculty at universities or other places that needs to have a bacterial collection instead.
Yeah, I was talking more about the eukarya, for instance. If you see only the eukarya, the amount of, lineage of species to describe, I mean, there is really incredible, just forgetting about bacteria and archaea, but is one issue that it's now being like, is really clear now that we are missing a lot of the real diversity. I mean, we are talking about 2 million, that could be 10 million, but I cannot imagine all the rest of taxa. I don't know your opinion. Why not? Yeah. Natural History Museum should not, because they don't focus, I think, in eukarya, in protist, in unicellular.
But again, I'm a zoology museum. But I think that there are two concepts there that are different, right? We're talking about taxonomy, taxonomic impediment, and then there is a big gap of unknown diversity.
Yeah.
And we have to stop thinking, again, like in the 19th century, that everything we discover we need to name. Those are two different objectives. And I think that we can use today indirect methods like the ARMS, metagenomics, eDNA, to assess what lives in places. Some of those things will have names, some of them won't. Some of them that will be important for the functioning of the ecosystem, we might want to name if they haven't been named. Some of the things we need to identify. But those are two different enterprises. And there's overlap, but there's also, is there a need to name the other 80% of species that we haven't named yet with a formal taxonomic description? So maybe it is, maybe there's not. But I think that we can start with two different things. I think that today might be more important to know what's out there than to put names to everything. Sometimes we have this impediment that, well, we don't really tell what it is there because we cannot name every single species of rotifer or every single species of nematode. And I think that those two things are important, but they're not necessarily the same. And I think that with the urgency of the biodiversity crisis, we need to assess what's out there. There's incredible discoveries that come out from the eDNA. The latest animal phylum that was described by your colleagues in Copenhagen, Micrognathozoa, had a single species described from Greenland, and then another one known from a subantarctic island. And a colleague of mine came a couple years ago and said, hey, I've detected eDNA for Micrognathozoa in the Pyrenees, right? It's like, no, Owen, that's impossible. Those things only live in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And then say, no, I have very strong eDNA samples. And I went with a couple of colleagues from the University of Copenhagen, from your museum this past summer, and we found this animal phylum with a single species described from Greenland. We found it in the middle of the Pyrenees. And then another eDNA study just came out that they're also in the Danube River, right? They're not named, but we're beginning to know the distributions of these species with eDNA. And I think it's very powerful. And we need to embrace it more. And we need to step aside from only those things that are named are important.
No, this is a molecular tree. And the things in red don't even have culture. So it was like, it just was to show this a little bit. Sorry. I don't know if you wanted to say something. Or?
I was just thinking that in terms of this, to be prepared for the future, to really make sure that we're taking samples now and we store them so that we can ask these questions in the future using eDNA or other methods. So maybe take samples from areas that we're not thinking about right now. But I'm sure, though, that the bacteria will be in any sample that we've already taken throughout time. But I think there could be more, maybe soil samples that would actually be really interesting for the future as we are changing the different habitats.
Which also means, I believe, that Edwin's digital twin, that will evolve too, because now we have an impressive number of different things that we could attach to that digital twin. But who knows, in 10 years or 20 years, what kind of information would be on that digital twin? It could be bacteria, it could be microbiomes, it could be all sorts of other things that
you can add them.
and I think this is also an interesting way of looking at the digital twins that we are creating, that they too will evolve, will be added more layers of information that we currently are not thinking about.
That's excellent. Yeah.
So, and also what I wanted to add was just that we should take the samples, but we should also not, contaminate them.
Yeah.
Because that is the biggest problem right now that we're having. Actually, what do you actually study if you haven't really been careful when you took your sample and you stored it away?
But think about all the data that you're adding to our collections by contaminating them. Who knows what people will get out of that in 30 or 50 years.
So we've talked about a few issues, that we, to start the conversation. We have some time left, and I would like to really open the discussion to the audience, because I think it's a privilege, a really interesting audience, and I'm sure you might have questions for the panel. Okay, thank you. So let's start a round. We still have time, so if people want to.
Yeah, thank you for your inspiring thoughts. I would like to come back to the question of trust. I think it's good news for us that the trust of museums or natural history museums is so high. But I think it's really bad news that the trust for policy is so bad. And natural history museums are not making the laws. No, they don't set the thresholds for carbon dioxide or for politicians. And they also don't say something about land use, that everything is done by policy. So I would like to ask how we can make use of this trust on the small balance, not becoming a party or something like this, but also to engage the people. And we cannot leave all the responsibility of the individuals. No? We can talk about consumption patterns, eating meat and everything like this, but I think we need policy and see that there's not trust in policy that really, I think it's a threat for democracy. So how would you think you can make something about with this trust you have, obviously?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's a really good one. And to say that the politicians, it's actually the Prime Minister and the Minister of Culture that signed off on my employment contract. So if my employer aren't trustworthy, why should I be? Did they have was that out of good knowledge that they appointed me or my colleagues? But so it's very important. So this study was done in Sweden, and there we have a system that is actually different even from the other Nordic countries, that we have government agencies that are they are freestanding from the politicians. So therefore, we could work, but we're not making the laws though, so that is the politicians that are making it. So it's a very good question, and I don't think I have a good answer to it. I think I need to get back to you tomorrow, or maybe my colleagues here in the panel could reflect.
I mean, one of the things is that if the population really trusts the science, right, then the science has more power to make pressure to the politicians, right, in the sense that, they're going to vote or not vote for someone who's supporting, the population because they really trust the decisions from the scientists. I don't think we're there yet. But in issues of climate, I think that there are countries, and maybe Sweden is one of them, where politicians are listening to what people say. I mean, the Greta Thunberg phenomenon is something unheard of before, right? And I think that she has created a very strong movement worldwide, but I'm sure it's even stronger in Sweden, right? So if a large section of the population is listening to environmentalists, is listening to scientists, that's what politicians will do. I think in smaller countries it's easier to do than in very large countries, but we need to keep fighting for that, right? To be heard by the population.
And also to make politicians see how we are useful to them. Yeah. Since there are an increasing number of politicians globally who know that action is needed. But it's very difficult for them to find the right examples, to find the right stories to tell, to find the simple examples that they understand, so they know that they will not get in trouble when they are trying to explain them. And And I think we need to think about more how we can help them, enabling those, providing them things that are immediately useful for them in their policy making. And they cannot come up with these examples. They don't have the data, they don't have the stories. We do. And we should share them, not just with the public, but also with other stakeholders, including politicians, including stakeholders who can influence policies, large corporations, big companies, NGOs, etc.
And I think we need to keep track also on this scale, because the politicians, this study was made quite close to a new election, and I think they were fighting quite brutally with one another, so I don't think that is a way to build trust. So what my peers here are saying to work together once again would probably do well. Also, the media didn't do really well, and in terms of storytelling and those that actually reach out, it's something to keep an eye on.
I just would like to prolongate the question of Catherine in the same kind of spirit, because we have this 6 mass extinction in front of us. Yeah. We know the pressures, so we have to fight the pressures. So who is the best kind of people to fight against those pressures? Of course, we have all the citizens, and we can enlighten the citizen in our museum and try to convince them to change, because they have a credit card, they have an elector card, and they can vote, and so on. And at the very top, you have the politicians, and we have to speak to politicians, trying to convince them, trying just to explain them what is biodiversity. It's the first step. But in between, where is the power? Where is the money? The money is in the hand of businessmen, is in the hand of investors, bankers, companies, and so on, copper mines, for example. And we have to convince those guys. And I think that we have to go to meet the worst, because it's with the worst that the amount of progress is the more interesting. If you are going to convince somebody who is already convinced, you will probably have a very nice time with him. But in terms of cost of your energy, it's better to go and to try to see something who is not good at all. So you have to focus on oil companies, for example. You have to focus on big banks, another example, in order to convince them to change their practices. You cannot tell them that they have to change their usual business, because an oil company will continue to search for oil, of course. But you have to try to explain them that biodiversity and environment in general is too serious to be just something that you can support when you have a leftover of money at the end of the year. But you have to introduce that in the strategy of your company as you are thinking with your building, with your human resources, with your general budget, and so on. You have to change your practices at the very beginning of your activity. You can continue your activity, because if you go to see a CEO of a big oil company and telling him that he has to stop, he will just throw you through the window or through the door. It's just useless. But you have to convince him that the challenge is so important that his business will collapse if it doesn't change. And for me, it's a very important way to trying to reduce the pressure and try to manage, as far as we can, the 6 mass extinction.
I think that's a very important point, that we really need to take those difficult conversations. And I think your point about finding what is the advantage to whichever stakeholder it is that we're talking to, we need to do that. And we are on a burning platform. We just need to let everybody know. So how does this burn me?
Miguel, do you have a question?
Yeah. It's a comment and a question. It's coming back a little bit to the main question of this debate, which is how natural history museums can help deal with the 6 mass extinction. And there were moments in the debate there was a strong focus on taxonomy and on the identity of the species, which of course is very important. But in the end of the day, if you only focus on that, your contribution to understanding the 6 mass extinction is the necrology. So how many species did we lose? Which is important. It is also important to build up narratives, but it won't solve the problem. And catching up on what Peter said, he said one thing. It was very interesting. He said, museums are about data, are about storytelling, and are about collaboration. Right? That's what you said. I noticed that you omitted science from your trilogy. Data without science is not particularly useful. We can accumulate hordes of data, and we won't be able to make any sense of it. And I'm a strong believer that museums, and I'm part of the Natural History Museum here in Madrid, which is a strong science-focused. We have a duty of leadership in natural sciences. Of course, science is made in universities and other research centers across the world, and we don't have the monopoly of the science. But we do have the luxury of having access to primary data, and we have the luxury in several cases, in our case, for example, of having time to just focus on science of natural history and natural sciences in general, and we're not alone with other natural history museums. So I think we have this strong responsibility to lead science in natural history, and we have to be strategic how we spend our time, our energy, our finances. To me, it's all about not just collecting more data. That, of course, is very important. It's being strategic about what data we need. And some of it is going to be taxonomic, but others are going to be about distributions. We need to know where the species are in order, for example, to have a clever protected area network. We have to know what are the relationships of species with the environment, and for that you need information on traits. You need to have information about how organisms interact among themselves, and we know very little about that. So a big project like the Web of Life would be extraordinarily important, and we museums are lagging behind in all of these areas. We're not leading the traits movement of data collection. We're not leading the biotic interactions. The distributions has been taken over somehow by other institutions, and in a way it's fine. But we're losing part of our niche and our sense of purpose. The science has to be associated with those things. We have to know exactly what are the types of data we need, and we have to be leaders in the development of methods to make sense of those data, and leaders in the development of theory, because theory is what allows us to interpret the data. It's just a bit of a comment, because I thought it was Gonzalo kind of hinted on those issues, on being strategic about the data. But maybe you guys could elaborate a little bit more about that, the links between science and data and the role of museums. Yeah,
well, absolutely. If I could just start off and then you could continue. I was trying to keep it simple. Maybe I kept it too simple. The point really is exactly the same. The point that you're making, that it's about scientific knowledge, about generating data. It's about generating data that we can actually we can trust, and there's always a decision. And I totally agree. We need to be very strategic in the kind of research that we're doing, that we are making the absolute most out of our collections to what is needed right now because I think we have a window maybe of 10, 20 years where real change can actually happen. But it'll not happen if we're not thinking strategically. It'll not happen if we're not thinking about using our scientific resources in the very best way to find the right things to study, to find the right examples, and to provide the right data that our decision makers need to make policies so we can make real change.
Yeah, I agree. We are just working on a new strategic plan for the Natural History Museum in Sweden, and instead of working on like this 3-year or 4-year plans, now we're taking 8-year plans, because this is so much that needs to be done over the next few years, and we can't really chop it up in pieces. It doesn't really make sense, because we need take this big step, and then we also need to make a number of changes to actually be able to do that. And one is to really put emphasis on research and also put priority to the research questions that need to be addressed now and those that actually can wait. And it's a really tough thing to do when you have an old organization. And so it's not business as usual, but rather make some quite strategic and clever changes to work for the future. So that's actually where we are at right now, and it's a tough choice, but important.
I have a little bit of a different opinion here. I mean, because we're putting all the weight on solving this matter in natural history museums, and we are just one. I mean, the same way that we have to collaborate among museums, we're actually a very small part of research centers doing biodiversity research. There's hundreds of universities for every museum. There's thousands of biologists working in other institutions, many of them tackling a lot of these questions. So while I agree that we need to do more, our strength is in specimens-based science. That's what we can do. And our strength is not in ameliorating species invasions. Our strength will be in documenting how those species have changed through time and maybe making some predictions. But we don't have the capacity to act, right? And there are a lot of other institutions. If you want to recover the California condor, it wasn't done by a museum, it was done by zoological gardens, who today are also playing a big role in biodiversity sciences, in contributing to, biogenomes. They have a lot of other species that are alive. So I think there's many more stakeholders here to try to solve this problem. I think we're a very important one. And for me, our mission is preserving those natural history collections. We're gonna have a lot of information about these things and training next generations of biodiversity scientists. Not all of them are going to go and work in a museum. Many of them are not. And many of them are going to go into policy. Many of them are going to go into universities and do other conservation, biotech. Biotech is also not very well tapped here, but they're beginning to get more interest also in the eDNA revolution and trying to discover new things. I think we cannot do it alone. No matter how important our museum is, no matter how many scientists we have, this is a much larger problem that natural history museums can solve. That's my opinion.
I think Lisa wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just need to add something, and it's that I guess one size doesn't fit all, because I would say that for Sweden, the PCB DDT problem that was around in the 60s and 70s would have played out completely different if it wasn't for the Natural Science Museum or Natural History Museum stepping in and really speaking out loudly, what is happening, what do we see, how do these populations change. And we have sea eagles really dropping to 0 in the 70s, and I would say that is actually the very specific knowledge that we could put forward and talk to politicians about and other decision-making authorities in the country that actually now we have 2,500, I think we had in one of the last counts, and it's going from 0 to 2,500. So these sea eagles are back, and I would say that hooray for natural history museums taking that step and taking that fight. We have a similar thing happening now with PFAS, and I was thinking in Swedish PFAS, okay. This chemical that is not breaking down in nature. And we have the samples from otters going from the 70s and forward, and that's requested by different regions of Sweden now because they keep this chemical within their tissues, and we have it in our sample bank. So one could actually see when did that toxin get into nature and how did it spread and did it actually decline. So that it's in the courtrooms, for example, now. So I think for some museums it makes sense, and for others it doesn't, and that's absolutely fine.
Let's have maybe the last, or we have more time? Or? Okay, so Isabel, please.
I will make it quick.
No problem.
I think going back to public trust and politicians' confidence on science, and in particular on museum science, I think that we don't know how to sell our value. Because I've been thinking long about, in law or in economics, they have these long-term trends that they build on data. And that's where they make predictions, that they actually use our tools, analytical tools developed by us. But in museums, we have this long-term data. I work on plants, and some of them go to the back to the Eocene. And we have both specimens showing leaf shape, so that's stomata, and that's information for climate change. And we do have, of course, as this morning we saw that genomic resources, and even we do have just the labels. And that's amazing how much you can get from the labels about how the plants have changed in terms of adaptation, how they move or how they adapt to different climates. So I think we haven't actually sold that value to the politicians, the idea of we can make long-term trends for you. And with those long-term trends, we can make predictions, and that's what they want. And I think that's so important for our collections, that we do have this repository, this reservoir of information then that goes back hundreds of years. And we do have this seed bank of seeds from the 14th century, going back even from Africa we have. So that's very important. I think we should sell that.
Yes.
I don't know what you think.
And I think that museums are using those data. We're selling those. We just opened up an exhibit in the public galleries called Thoreau's Plants, where they've been, Thoreau is this, for Americans, of course, know Thoreau, but, it was one of the early naturalists, very, very famous writer who lived in this cabin in the middle of the woods for like a year, although his mom was bringing him the laundry, apparently. It wasn't that remote anymore. But anyway, and he documented a lot of the flowering times of these plants, and these things now have been tracked. And the flowering times of the plants in Massachusetts have been shifting several weeks in a very relatively short span of time. We do have an exhibit for the public showing the impact on climate change, on flowering of plants. So I think that many museums are using those data to showcase our specimens. So that's what I was saying earlier. We do have the specimens, we have the tools to show a lot of these trends. I don't see myself and we can make, show that, the mercury accumulation in our specimens when like these or these might be responsible for this extinction. But I think we need much more to act upon how to solve that specific problem of mass extinctions. We know a lot about those. We know that the snails have disappeared in Morea when the African land snail was introduced, right? And we know that 70% of the birds disappear in the Hawaii Islands when humans arrive there. That's what we document. How do we recover those 70%? No, we don't. Just not to do in another place, but that's my negative view on that, yeah. She's more positive, so maybe we should end this.
Yeah.
So I think there is one. There are two questions. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think I have a concrete question, and I would like to know what you think about museums getting involved with all the social activities like associations like Extinction of Rebels or Greta Thunberg. What do you think museums would have to act with them or stay apart, or what's your opinion?
Well, I can start a little bit then. And so we're a government agency, so we shouldn't. But at the same time, just by speaking out about our knowledge, it's sometimes heard as we're having an opinion. And I think that's fine, as long as we know that the only thing we do is that we are talking about the facts that should be clear to everybody. And we had a responsibility to make storytelling and to really put this in a, not only say the fact and then back away, but rather this fact together with all the knowledge that we have is actually giving this picture or this forecast of the world or going back and adding to from maybe what we see from the fossils, as some of our research do. It says quite clear things about the future, and I know that that is people think that we are opinionated, and they can accuse us for that, and that should be fine. It's just because it's a hot topic, but we wouldn't go on the demonstration, I would say, but we could have our own sort of arena and say maybe the same thing. If it's aligned, then that's what it does.
No.
Could I add to that? So I think what we have are platforms for interaction, for meeting places, and if we don't invite them in, I think we are losing an opportunity. We are losing a very important voice. We are missing out on a very important conversation that's going on, not just locally in different countries, but across countries. We need to have that conversation. We are here as public institutions to serve society, to serve the public. They're members of the public, but they also need to meet other people. I think Kjaergaard phrased it very eloquently when we need to meet people with openness, with kindness. We need to go into that conversation. And what we can do at Natural History Museums is to provide that space, that neutral space. So one example, what we did, the Green Student Organization in Denmark, it's all different political parties' observations. They could not find a meeting place. They couldn't meet with the people from the left nor from the right wing, but they were all so concerned about these issues. But we could provide a neutral space to have that conversation across the political spectrum. And I think this is one thing that we should really think about, to be that space for the most critical conversations that we need to have, and we need to have those conversations. We cannot shy away from them. So I would actually propose that we're taking that step and inviting them in. And when we do that, the reward is amazing. So we've changed our demography now. We have about a third of our visitors are between 15 and 30-year-old, which is, as we all know, incredibly difficult to get that demography into the museum. But we've been there. We've listened to them. We've taken the conversations that they think are important. We've taken that seriously. We've provided that space, and now they come. And I'm sure when they get children, they will bring their children, and we'll start building a new generation of people who appreciate museums, who appreciate what we're doing at Natural History Museums.
Any comments?
I mean, again, I think, Scandinavia is very different from the rest of the world. I think institutions, and like you say, in the US, you have to shy away from activism. You cannot, as a museum, support one activist group. I think establishing a conversation, right, bringing the science, and then bringing different parties to discuss, have a civilized conversation, it's the solution for some countries. I think that if you just line up with one activist group, then you might be rejected by another large part of society. And that's not what we want. We want to bring everyone in. We want everyone to trust science and not say because you're from one party or another one, you're aligning with these or you're aligning with those people. And that should go beyond my personal beliefs or my personal support for an activist group or something like that. I think that there are very different places where you can or you cannot do that.
So we go to the question.
Yeah, well, it's not really a question. I just want to follow up on the importance of the science and collections and the message in society and using the data well to interpret. So I'm very much believing in what we're saying. The museums, we need to be good at identifying what we're good at and not trying to do everything. And we have a specific and for me, very clear role in that, is that we are able to interpret the specimens and make them understandable to a broader public, be that a scientific public or an interested and informed public. And I think the role of museums is really interpreting the specimens and interpreting them in an evolutionary context. So I really believe the taxonomy we do now is not just the classic kind of describing. We do I-taxonomy. And I think we should make a new term, which is I-taxonomy, integrative taxonomy. It's the way we approach the world. And so going back to the comment that you're making, Gonzalo, I really think it's very important that we change a little bit our habits and that we actually are using our data and we're citing specimens. We have unique codes. We use our data standards. We up our game so that our data is searchable, usable, reusable, reproducible, and findable. This is the fair data principles. And we really need to be responsible for putting that into our institutions, so that specimens have unique codes. Then they can be linked and used in a very, very much more big data format. And I wanted to go back with some good news, hopefully, about the situation on research assessment. So I guess you've all heard of DORA, right? The Declaration of DORA. We've signed it, and so it's a really, really good motivating factor. And there's much change at the moment. I don't know about the States, but certainly in Europe, there's been building on the DORA initiative.
I think that the CSIC has embraced it.
Yeah, so we, in CTAF, we're actually trying to come up, because obviously DORA was a little bit at the beginning university-based research, and we are, in CTAF at the moment, working on trying to produce guidelines for museum people, so much more specifically based on collections management, databasing, all the things that we do as scientists. So we hope to come up with these, and then you guys can go back to your own research foundations, your own governments and your own bodies. And I do think it's a little bit our responsibility to do that lobbying. So we choose where we publish, right? We should be publishing in diamond open access journals where there's no pay wall, there's no you pay to read or you pay to publish, and we need to make choices as a taxonomic community to move away from that. So it's a little kind of a call to rethink the system that we use and the models that we're adopting, because if we decide to move away from that, we can and we should. So I want to go back to that question of the research. You brought it up, I think, and unfortunately we're still judged a little bit by the statistics. Yeah. But the statistics are not all that we are, and we, as a community, as a group, as museums, as taxonomists, as researchers, we also need to make choices about where we publish. We might take a hit, but as senior scientists, do we care whether we take a hit? No. So we need to change it for our youngsters coming up. We all feel young at heart, right? But we're kind of not anymore. So we need to make those choices. And I think, getting the ORCID IDs, getting the data connected, getting the EJT model where data is readable, taxonomic names go straight into databases. This is the way that we facilitate change. And we need to be the drivers of those change. The senior people who don't really need to build up a huge CV, we need to be those drivers. So it's kind of it's not really a question, it's kind of hopefully finishing on a good note, is that the museums also have the responsibility to be drivers for change for our own community, for our own good, for our own taxonomists and for our own youngsters. The future generations need us to change, to make change. Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know, Rafa, what do you if there are any questions, there are any more questions, if there are no more. Yeah, okay. We are done. Okay, now we go for dinner. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Right. Thank you. That was fun.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful.